welcome to EFO Talks. With me is Agustina Girodi. She's a professor at American University. She is Argentinian, and today we are going to discuss Argentina with her. Last time Argentina was in the news was when Lionel Messi won the 2022 FIFA World Cup. This time it is in the news for its elections. Agustina, what is going on?
Thank you, Atul, for the observation. It's for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. What's going on? That's a great question. Lots is going on. So we had elections last Sunday. The first round of election. Argentina has a second round coming up in November 19th because none of the candidates was able to get 50% of the votes. We have an outsider competing for the presidency, Javier Milei, who is an ultra-libertarian candidate, very controversial, with some important questions about his sanity and mental health. And on the other hand, we have Sergio Massa, who is representing the traditional Peronist party, although a new faction of the Peronist party. And he was able to come in first during the first round, something that was quite shocking because he had not performed that well during the open primaries that we had in August. The third candidate, Patricia Bullrich, who represents the center-right voters in Argentina. She did not make it to the second round, and earlier in the week, she announced that she would support Milei, meaning that she was trying to entice her voters to go with Milei, which created a huge crisis in the opposition party, in her own party. The party is split now, which is very unfortunate because that was a party that managed to become an important political force in the country. And so up until this week, we had three clear pillars in Argentinian politics, and now that's gone. So lots going on. As I said before, the second round is in November 19th. We have 3 more weeks, and a lot can happen in the next 3 weeks. So we will see how this unfolds.
Agustina, tell us about the system, the democratic system in Argentina. Of course, I grew up in India and I studied in England, and there you have the parliamentary system and the first past the post system. And the leader of the majority in the House of Commons in the UK and the Lok Sabha in India becomes the prime minister. The US, of course, is a presidential system. Generally, it's 2 leading contenders and it's the electoral college. So what is the Argentinian system? How does voting happen? You've already given us an inkling, first round, second round. And of course, in the second round, you have to get 50% plus 1 vote. So give us a bit of an introduction about that and about the 3 parties. What do they stand for? What is their ideology, economic ideology? What is their vision for society?
Yeah. So Argentina has a presidential system like the US, and like all the rest of the Latin American countries, we have emulated the US Constitution. We do not know what a parliamentary system is in Latin America, although some countries behave like a parliamentary systems. Argentina, unlike the US, reformed the Constitution in 1994 and got rid of the Electoral College. So that's a big difference with the US, in which the Electoral College has the final word. In Argentina, unlike the US, we also have 2 rounds of election. The first one, the candidate that has the majority of the vote, and by majority, I mean 50% of the vote, wins. But there's also another rule: if you get 10 more points than the runner-up, you can also make it during the first round. Second round, you don't need to have 50% of the vote. Whomever gets the majority of the vote wins. So this is what we are gonna see in 3 weeks. In terms of another important feature of Argentina, which is similar to the US and also to India, is that this is a federal country, and the power of the governors is very, very important to understand politics at the national level. And actually, most of what we saw happening on Sunday and the victory of Sergio Massa is related to that power of the governors and how they played for him during the first round of elections. So we cannot understand national level politics in Argentina if we do not understand the politics of the governors. In terms of the three candidates that were competing on Sunday, we have Javier Milei, who is an ultra-libertarian, ultra-right candidate who proposes to get rid of pretty much everything. So he does not believe in the role of the state. He looks and sounds like an anarchist at some points, right? So he does not believe in anything related to state provision. He is very conservative, anti-abortion, although he has suggested that if he becomes president, he wants to break ties with the Catholic Church in Rome. He's very anti-Catholic, which poses some problems for the people who are voting for him because they tend to be more conservative. So he's extremely contradictory in many of the stances that he has. And to me, probably one of the most worrying things about him, there are many that are worrying, but one of the most worrying and striking things that we have seen during the campaign is that he broke with one of the central agreements that Argentina had acquired after the transition to democracy, which was that nothing related to the past military dictatorship was gonna be challenged. And so he shows up now saying that the number of people that were kidnapped and killed during the dictatorship, that number is much lower than it was suggested before. And so he brings in the idea of revisiting the dictatorship, which is something that no one had done before. So he's kind of breaking one of the pillars of the Argentine democracy that was very, very solid, and an agreement that everybody, politicians from the right and from the left, supported. So that's Javier Milei. Then we had Patricia Bullrich, who lost, and she was very close to Milei on some issues. Patricia Bullrich and her party were also conservative, but very Catholic. They presented a neoliberal agenda. So going back to the 1980s, what Argentina had experienced in the 1990s and late 1980s. She also had a lot of power coming from many governors that belong to her party. She also belongs, so this party is the party of the former President Mauricio Macri, who was in power from 2015 to 2019. And finally, we have Sergio Massa, who is the current Minister of Finance. It is the first time that we have a Minister of Finance who is trying to fix the economy and at the same time run for president. Of course, no one thought he would manage to gain this much support given the very, very dire situation that the Argentine economy is going through. But still, he was able to come in as first last Sunday. He represents the Peronist Party. The Peronist Party is a very big bag of many different things. So what I would say is that he only represents one faction of the party. He is trying to distance himself from the Kirchneristas, which is the faction that is associated with Cristina Fernández de Kirchner and the youngest politicians that grew up with her and who are extremely fanatic of Cristina Fernández de Kirchner. So Sergio Massa is trying to distance himself from that faction, which is seen by many as very controversial. It reminds people of all the bad things that Kirchnerism brought to the country. So Sergio Massa is trying to distance himself from that rhetoric, and he's also trying to present the Peronist Party in a new light. The Peronist Party has reinvented itself so many times that this should not be surprising, actually, what he managed to accomplish. That being said, it's not clear at all that he will be able to become president on November 19th. Milei continues to have a lot of support, and now with the support that Woolrich and the endorsement that Woolrich announced this week, it is likely that Milei will get even more votes than what he got last Sunday. So things are still very, very unclear and open up in the air.
So there's no clear frontrunner right now?
Not yet.
Oh, right.
We cannot trust the polls one bit. I don't know what's going on with the polls in Argentina, but they are not trustworthy at all.
Polls even in the US proved to be trustworthy. I had a feeling that, and this was completely based on meeting Trump supporters and seeing vote for Donald Trump in 2016, and also getting inputs from people working in the Hillary Clinton campaign at a junior level. And I had a feeling he could win. And I spoke at Harvard a week before the election results, as did Glenn Carl, my co-author, who retired from the CIA, and everyone thought we were being paranoid. And I was also at Capitol Hill on January 6, 2020, and I talked to about 50 people. And what emerged during both conversations was, during both episodes, was that people are fundamentally not even telling you what they think.
Yes.
And
absolutely true.
Also the polling that established agencies are conducting tend to have biased samples. So they are no longer as reliable as they were in the past.
I completely agree with that. I'm not a pollster, but so one of the things that I've noticed about among even friends and people that I know is that people don't tell you that they are voting for Milei or that they are voting for Trump, right? So there's something, although once people start telling, then there is more room for the others. But it's very true that they don't speak their truth.
So tell me, who's supporting Milei and who's supporting Massa?
Right. So the Milei voter that we know, so we know this from polls, the Milei voter is fundamentally male. So it's young. We're talking about young people, young men voting for Milei. It's interesting because during the open primaries that were held in August, Milei was able to get the support from the lower classes, and this was very, very new in Argentine politics, because typically the lower classes tend to vote for the Peronist Party, and so there we saw a change. But we're talking about young male voters. Some of them are educated, and some of them live in very poor conditions.
Are they urban? Are they largely urban?
They are largely urban, although, yes, they are largely urban. What we found is that, so Argentina has this very weird system that has an open primary, and this is what we had in August. That means that no matter to what party you're affiliated, you can vote for any of the candidates who are going to be running for president. And that first election gives the system a bit of information about voting behavior. But that information is tricky because people vote very differently with a different strategy when they go for the open primaries and when they go to the real election, right? In some cases, they just punish the opponent. When they go to vote for real, then the calculus is different. And so what we saw last Sunday is different. So the voters that supported Milei are mostly located in urban centers. The voters who supported Massa, by contrast, are scattered all throughout the country. And so this is the reason why the governors became so important. So the Peronist Party relies on a network of governors, as all parties do, right? So all parties have a territorial extension that represents the party in the provinces or the states. Milei does not have that. The party organization that Milei has is not territorially extended throughout the country. So it's mostly urban areas. The Massa voter, as I said before, is scattered all throughout the country. It comes from, of course, the very lower and least economic population. This is the traditional Peronist voter. But many people from the middle class have also voted for the Peronist Party. And here we have both men and women who are supporting Massa. The upper classes tend to be always very anti-Peronist, and so there's no way that they will vote for a Peronist candidate ever, right? No matter what they offer. The only time when the Peronist Party was able to obtain the vote of the upper classes was in the 1990s when Carlos Menem was elected and he presented and he won, or he wanted to implement an economic program that was very much in line with what elites wanted, the neoliberal agenda, the so-called Washington Consensus. But it's hardly impossible that someone from the upper classes will vote for the Peronist Party.
All right, you've talked about the neoliberal agenda, so let's shift to the economy. Argentina's annual inflation is over 138%, the third highest in the world. About 40% of its people cannot afford a basic bag of groceries and an essential service like transport or healthcare. The country owes the International Monetary Fund $44 billion, a third of the institution's lending portfolio, but has no dollar reserves to make repayments. How is this crisis affecting the election?
Well, this crisis, which is very, very dire, very, very dire, so we should not underestimate what's going on in Argentina, is very reminiscent of crises that we have had in the past, in particular the big crisis that we had in the 1980s that resulted in cycles of hyperinflation. We're not there yet, although people are speaking of an upcoming cycle of hyperinflation. So given the very bad economic situation, one would imagine that the current Minister of Finance, who in part is responsible for the economic crisis, would not be popular. What we saw on Sunday is quite contradictory, right? So Sergio Massa, the current Minister of Finance, was the winner of the election. He got 6 points more than Javier Milei. And a debate opened up after those.
Yeah, I mean, just for our listeners and viewers, the election results that I have in front of me is that Sergio Massa got 36% of the vote and Javier Milei got 30% of the vote. So there was a 6 percentage lead that Sergio had. And let's see, as you said, in the second round now with the third candidate who dropped out promising support to Milei, we don't know what will come, but that's a pretty good lead, and it was in contradiction to what the opinion polls were predicting.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So what we saw on Sunday was a bit shocking, and commentators were actually counting on the fact that given the very bad performance of the economy, and also given the fact that Sergio Massa is being accused of being the person who is responsible for that bad performance, that voters would punish him. We saw the opposite, right? So he came in first. And so a debate got opened up about, so how do we understand this? I mean, this is contradictory also to some political science theory that says that whenever the economy is performing bad, voters punish incumbents. One of the things that commentators began to talk about is that Argentines have gotten used to living in economic crises, right? So there is sort of a normalization of the bad times in economic terms.
That sounds a bit like Lebanon. There are some countries that adapt to continuous crisis, and the normal rules then don't apply. Pakistan is another country. They've gone to the IMF, God knows, 500 times. I mean, not quite, but you get the point. They're always running. And
yes.
So some countries are in crisis, and it could not just be economic, it could also be political, it could also be civil war. I mean, look at Sudan and South Sudan. So I'm not suggesting Argentina is like Sudan, but economically, it has the most money from the IMF.
Yes.
And still, they are in crisis.
Yeah, and so what we had anticipated would happen did not happen, meaning that the person who is seen as responsible for bringing Argentina to this very messy state is being rewarded rather than being punished. I think that the Peronist Party this time around activated its party machine, something that we had not seen during the open primaries. And as I said before here, the role played by the governors and the mayors of the party was crucial. And actually, Sergio Massa managed to obtain more than 3 million votes than what he had gotten during the open primaries. The rhetoric or the narrative that we see in Argentina, on the other hand, is that things are so bad that it doesn't matter that someone like Javier Milei will be the next president, because things cannot go even worse than what they are currently. And so if we have someone who comes with very crazy ideas about the state and social services, let's give him a chance. It doesn't matter. Things are so horrible now that if he has to blow up the system, just let that happen, right? So there is a feeling of exhaustion. People are completely exhausted about what's going on. No one is trusting the system. They are kind of expecting the arrival of a messiah to save Argentina, and for many voters, that messiah is Javier Milei. So the bad performance of the economy and how it's impacting the elections is very unclear. On the one hand, you can argue that there's a normalization, that, well, things here are really bad, and it doesn't matter if the president, the next president will be the current Minister of Finance, or whether the next president is going to be a crazy guy who will blow up everything in the air. It's hard to read how the economic situation is playing out.
So let's talk about the crazy guy. Javier Milei proposes to slash public spending by 14% of the GDP, cut the number of ministries from 18 to 8, blow up the central bank, and swap Argentina's peso for the US dollar. He has also suggested that people be able to buy and sell bodily organs legally and other Milton Friedman-like market measures. He's very anti-John Maynard Keynes, very interestingly. So the question arises, are Argentines voting for Javier Milei to protest rampant corruption and dysfunctional institutions? Is it, as you said, search for a messiah? What explains his charm?
So what explains his charm is the narrative that he presented early on during the campaign about going against the caste. He speaks all the time about the caste. The caste refers to the traditional politicians from all parties. It's not just the incumbent. All politicians from the right to the left that have gotten used to living from the state. And so in that bag, he brings pretty much all the political class that has been in power since 1983 when Argentina transitioned to democracy. So this has been his narrative all this time, that he's an outsider, that he comes with new ideas, that people who were in charge of governing Argentina since 1983 are all corrupt. They are all members of this caste who is sucking the resources of the state, and that he will rule against that caste. That's the narrative. Yet, of course, he has to put together a team to run the government. And what we have seen in the last 2 months is that all the advisors that he is meeting with and who are advising him on how to run the country are, of course, members of what he calls the caste, right? Because he cannot rule without people who are not part of the political system. So that's the first contradiction. The second contradiction, which we saw quite dramatically this week, is that now he's inviting the voters and the politicians who were aligned with Patricia Bullrich. And so he has already offered ministries to Patricia Bullrich, who 2 weeks ago was a leading member of the caste. And he has been offering other ministries to other people, increasing the number of ministries, not reducing them, right? So Javier Milei is full of contradictions, and that is what also makes people very, very nervous, because we are dealing with someone who is not sending a clear message of what he's going to do and what his ideas are. So the way in which he got popular was to go against the system. But now he needs the system. And so what we saw this week is that many of the Milei voters are saying, wait, he's doing exactly the opposite of what he what he said and what he promised us. So I think that in the next 3 weeks, as he will need to show more appeal to the center voters, many of the promises that he has done in the past are going to be gone.
So you've talked about his policies. Now let's get to his personality. Javier Milei has introduced audiences to his 4 cloned English mastiffs, as if one wasn't enough, boasted on television about being a sex guru whom former girlfriends call the naughty cow. I don't know why he's not called the naughty bull, but hey ho, there we go. Maybe he's, playing to the LGBTQ plus audience. I don't know. Sung praises of tantric sex, boasted that he could go without ejaculating for 3 months, and performed a song called Tantric Bomb with his pop star girlfriend. In a Catholic country, and you've mentioned he doesn't like the Catholic Church, but this is even more interesting. in a Catholic country, Milei is considering converting to Judaism and is consulting a rabbi. He said his first state visit would be to Israel. And he seems to be a strange celebrity figure. So is he Argentina's Donald Trump, promising to drain the swamp? Is he a modern day parody of Eva Peron? Because of course, Argentina has this old showmanship, flamboyant celebrity politics culture. Maradona is a saint. Diego Maradona is a saint. I'm sure Lionel Messi will get sainthood too. So the question is, what is going on from the outside? This is bizarre. This is theater of the absurd.
Yeah, well, Javier Milei is one of these characters that we have seen in the last couple of years in the US, like Donald Trump, in Brazil, like Jair Bolsonaro. He's very much in line with the rhetoric that both Bolsonaro and Trump had, very eccentric, very aggressive. If you listen to the way he interacts with pundits or TV presenters or the media in general, he's extremely aggressive. He insults people all the time. In terms of, well, you brought up the issue of the dogs. He has been very vocal about the fact that he consults with his 4 dogs before making any policy decision, that he gets the inspiration from his dogs, and that he's connected to them, that they are a very important element of support.
And they're all cloned, by the way. They are all cloned.
They are cloned.
Exactly
yes.
the same.
Yeah, they are exactly the same. But for many, again, I think that the reason why he has been able to conquer the Argentine voter is because he presented this narrative that he was going to be against the system. I think that no one would deny that he's crazy, that many of the statements that he made and is making are quite crazy. This week, he gave a bunch of interviews to TV shows, and in some of them, there were things that were extremely worrying, and it opened up a debate about the need to test the mental health of presidential candidates before an election.
Yeah, quick interjection. I don't understand how you have a presidential candidate who goes against an Argentine pope, the first Argentine pope, who's so popular. Obviously, yes, there are people say he belongs to liberation theology. He's in fact a crypto-Marxist. All of that may be true, and that's why Javier Milei hates him, and I'm sure the upper classes hate the pope. But the pope is extraordinarily popular. The country is fundamentally still culturally a Catholic country. I see Argentine players doing this, making the cross when they step on the field. I see Messi do that. Not all European players do that. Argentina seems to be more religious than Europe. And this candidate is saying things against an Argentine pope, against the Catholic Church in a Catholic country. And that, for me, is discombobulating what's going on.
Yeah, but so here is the tricky part about Javier Milei, that he is against the Pope, he is against the Catholic Church, one could say, but on the other hand, he supports his anti-abortion, right? And he's very conservative on many of the policies that he says that he will implement. So it's extremely incoherent. He does not have a coherent narrative. He doesn't have a coherent program. So when people start asking him tricky questions about policy implementation, he simply cannot answer. He's good at answering questions related to the economy because he's an economist himself. But when you ask him about other topics, he simply cannot provide a concrete answer as to how he will implement or do things. So going back to the issue of Catholicism, he claims that the current Pope, which is left-leaning, so to speak, and you mentioned he might be associated with liberation theology. He argues that the current Pope is a Peronist, right? And so he uses that as a way of confronting with Peronism as well. But as you said before, Argentines are very proud of the Pope. I would disagree with you that Argentina is a heavily Catholic country. It's culturally Catholic, but people don't take religion that seriously anymore. And the other thing that is not minor is that the power of the Catholic Church in Argentina and also in Latin America is declining. I mean, what we see is the takeover of evangelists.
Exactly, especially in Brazil. Please
Brazil,
carry on.
in Mexico, so we cannot understand the victory of Bolsonaro or even Lula without looking into the support that evangelicals are giving to candidates. So Argentina might look maybe Catholic, but in practice, I would question that a little bit. And this is a big change with the past. Argentina, among all the countries in Latin America, is amongst the least religious. We tend to have very progressive values. Of course, there are sectors of the population that are very conservative. But if you look I don't know, same-sex marriage, abortion, and all things related to gender transitions, Argentina has been a forerunner in the region.
All right. So now, question for you, and this is the alarming question. You've already touched upon it. From 1976 to 1923, Argentina was under brutal military rule, and thousands disappeared. Milei has, as you said, reopened those wounds, and he's declared, "We value the idea of memory, truth, and justice." So let's start with the truth. There weren't 30,000 victims. There were 8,753. So I have a very simple and serious question. Do Argentines connect Javier Milei with Jorge Rafael Videla, the military dictator who ruled the country from 1976 to 1981? Is he somehow tarred with the same brush?
As I said before, Javier Milei, and in particular his vice president candidate, Victoria Villarruel, are the first politicians to revisit the agreements that all political forces had made explicit and implicitly after the last very brutal military dictatorship that we had. He's the first one to do it, and here I want to focus on the role that the vice president, the candidate for the vice presidency, has. So Victoria Villarruel has always been a political figure, that she is the daughter of military officers, and she has always, since she became a political figure, advocated for the military the role of the military during the dictatorship. She has argued that the Argentine so-called dirty war was waged by two different camps, and that most of the attention has been on the people that were killed and murdered by the military, but her narrative is that the military also suffered, and there were many military officers that were killed by what she calls the terrorists. And so her whole career, which is not that long, she has been advocating for the victims of the military side. Up to that, we could say, well, that's fair. There were two sides to this story, but what we see as something new, and there were always groups that were advocating for the military, but what we see as something completely new is to start reclaiming that some of the facts that have been proven with very strong evidence. We should not forget that the generals and the officers that perpetrated these atrocities were trialed and sent to jail. So there was evidence proving that.
Yeah.
It's the first time that a politician is
And
saying
that happened recently. That
Yeah.
happened fairly recently, less than 10 years ago, and that happened more than once. They were convicted twice, especially Jorge Rafael Videla.
So this is the first time that a politician is saying this openly. Mauricio Marti suggested it, but he very quickly realized that he should not open up that debate. But this is the first time that we have a politician advocating for a whole revision of what happened in the 1970s. When there's already evidence of what happened, and not only evidence, that evidence was used fairly to send people to jail and to trial them. This to me is very worrying. It's worrying not only because she's casting doubts about a process that is the pride of our country. I mean, there have been very few trials that have been so widely celebrated in the world. I don't know if you were able to watch the movie Argentina 1985, but it's all about this very unique trial. So it's a trial that was well done. It's not that it was improvised. But the other thing that is worrying to me is that this new narrative that she is presenting resonates with some young people. So young people did not experience the dictatorship. And as we know, new generations tend to forget about the suffering that older generations went through. And so this new discourse that she's offering seems to be quite, I wouldn't say popular among the young generations, but it's not as traveling as it is for older generations who went through the dictatorship. So if they win, and this is a discussion that is reopened, I believe that the newer generations, since they have not experienced a military dictatorship and they forgot about what happened, might say, okay, let's revisit this. This might be something worth doing. And that to me would imply that this very basic agreement that all Argentine forces had done in the last 40 years, so this is the 40th anniversary of the Argentine democracy, is going to be challenged. And Argentina has been a mess economically, but if you look at its democratic institutions, of course, there are problems of corruption, there are problems of accountability and of institutional weakness, but Argentina has been a solid democracy for the last 40 years. No one has questioned that democracy was the only possible option. So if this new narrative comes into play, I see there is some opening for some type of democratic backsliding.
All right, which means the military might one day come out of the barracks and rule even.
I don't know if the military, because they don't have a budget, right? They don't have resources, but you open the door for politicians like Trump, like Bolsonaro, who are eroding democratic institutions from within.
So a caudillo, the Latin American caudillo culture.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. So what lies in store for Argentina?
What lies in store for Argentina? Whomever wins on November 19th.
Well, you have won the FIFA World Cup, so everything's great.
Yes. Whomever wins the election will have to deal with a country that is in shambles. The economy, as we spoke before, is in really, really bad shape, and it's going to be very hard for whomever wins to rule in a country that has so much to improve on the economic front. It will have to rule with a divided Congress. So the results for the House and the Senate are already there. So those are the results we saw on Sunday. Milei was able to win several seats. The party of Patricia Bullrich was the big loser. They lost many seats. And the Peronist party, with its different factions, managed to get more seats. But no one has a majority. So whomever wins the presidency will have to deal with a divided government. They will
a divided legislature, you mean?
Legislature, yeah.
Because you also have the separation of powers that we have in the US.
In the US.
And you have the executive, the president, and of course, you have your version of the US Congress. And
so Congress is divided, and so the president will have a hard time passing legislation. There's going to be a lot of coalition making in order to pass legislation.
Well, sounds a bit like the US, where the Speaker of the House denies the legitimacy of the elections.
Exactly. And this would not be a problem for Sergio Massa, because that's how he has used to ruling the country, to the Peronist party. I mean, not Sergio Massa. The Peronist party is very used to making coalitions, but it could be a problem for Javier Milei, because again, he came to politics with a discourse that he would not make any bargaining with the caste. And so if he becomes the president of Argentina, by default, he will have to engage in a lot of coalition making and bargaining with many people that he despises. Sergio Massa, if he wins, he's a very avid politician with a lot of skills to negotiate. He himself was mayor of a big municipality in the province of Buenos Aires, where he did very, very well. So he has experience ruling. On the other hand, Javier Milei, he was first elected as a member of the House in 2021. So he only has 2 years of experience as a legislator. We do not know anything about how he could rule a country. So there is a big question mark there. And then the other thing that I would say we should need to look at is the role of the governors. The majority of the governors now belong to Patricia Bullrich party. As I said before, governors play a crucial role, not only in their own districts, and because they can command voters, but they have a big leeway and leverage on the National Congress. Many of the legislators and senators that are in charge of passing legislation tend to be in very close contact with their governors. And typically governors can exert a lot of power on them. And so governors exert power on national level politics by way of influencing legislators in Congress. And the governors are divided this time around. So it's not, in previous decades, governors all belong to the Peronist party. Nowadays, the governorships are more divided. So we also have different political colors in the provinces, which will increase, again, the ability of the president to bargain with these actors. So I see, or I envision, a lot of bargaining in the next couple of years.
So you've painted an image of economic crisis and political division. Is this, taking a step back, is this emblematic of what is going across Latin America? Because there seems to be this sort of phenomenon all across from north to the south of the continent.
So it is true that societies and countries, and this has not been different in Latin America, are more polarized. That's for sure. We saw that in Brazil. We saw that in Chile. We are seeing that in Mexico as well. Although in Mexico the opposition is completely dismantled, and so the polarization gets diluted in part because there is no other band that is representing the opposition. But definitely these are years of high polarization, and the polarization goes in both extremes. So we have the left and the right. I'm a bit concerned about the rise of right-wing populism in Latin America. So we know that Bolsonaro, Juan Antonio Cast in Chile, and Milei, they have connections. So it's not that they are operating in isolation. They talk to each other. They get funding from the same people. The Trump team is also very involved. The Spanish Vox people are also very involved in what's going on in Latin America, and they are very supportive of figures like Bolsonaro, Milei, and Cast. So if Milei wins, that could imply that the rise of right-wing populism will still be a threat. At some point, the defeat of Bolsonaro gave a respite in the sense that he lost power, and one could think that overall his influence has declined. But if Milei wins, then we will have another right-wing populist leader in power, and that can also influence Brazil and Chile. And there are elections coming up in these two other countries, in Chile first, and then in Brazil. And you could see a diffusion effect there as well, in particular because of all these international, transnational networks that are very supportive of these candidates. It's true, on the other hand, that most of the countries in Latin America are ruled by the left now, and they also are connected. But I could see a victory of Milei as having a demonstration effect on other countries as well, especially in Chile and Brazil.
I see. So the left has its task cut out. They have to perform. They can't run an economy with 138% inflation, and not expect blowback.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, Agustina, thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and we'll have you back. All the best with your semester ahead, and we'll see you very, very, very soon.
Thank you, Atul, so much for the invitation. It was a pleasure.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.